Right. It's said that the EU is going fully into neo-liberalism. Do you think that's true?
Well, it's true, and it's not a new thing. It's been happening since 1983, and I choose 1983 as a milestone in the neoliberal development within the EU, because it was the year the ERT, the European Roundtable of Industrialists, was actually formed. Since then, most of the recommendations of ERT to the EU Commissioner have been turned eventually into EU policy. That's the situation at the moment. Whatever step forward into neoliberalism by the EU has been met by huge resistance by the European people. I'm thinking of Maastricht, I'm thinking of different directives, Amsterdam, I'm thinking of Nice, etc. And the big shift towards neoliberalism in any case was 2006, and that's when all the forces of the EU have been trying to concentrate in crushing any resistance to this development. And 2006 is the year when the Trade Commissioner, Peter Mandelson, developed the Global Europe Strategy. Global Europe Strategy has two approaches. On the one hand, how the EU companies can conquer foreign markets, and therefore it's been a very aggressive policy towards the rest of the world, and the name Global Europe speaks by itself. So a number of free trade agreements have been pushed with different countries. I'm talking about the EPAs with Africa, the Caribbean and Asia, and the association agreements mainly with Latin America, with Central America and Andean American countries. This is on the global level. On the local level, they're trying to make Europe itself more competitive, what means to dismantle whatever is left of the social welfare system.
And what effect do you feel that this development in Lisbon will have on countries like the Latin American countries, developing countries?
Well, it's certainly having a very clear impact from the point of view that it makes it more difficult to oppose to the negative impacts of EU policy at a large scale. As I said, EU developments towards neoliberalism have been facing a huge resistance by the European people in moving all the decision-making power to Brussels and not giving, for instance, the power to ratify or not trade agreements to national parliament. It obviously makes it more difficult for civil society to have an input in whatever policy is decided by the EU.
Do you see it as being damaging to the interests of Latin American countries?
Well, certainly it is damaging from the point of view that civil society is going to find it more difficult to put their own message across. And as I said, most of the EU policy has been developed up to now, even though you have some mechanisms to somehow contest the EU policy. Still, most of the EU policy has been drafted by a very elitist group of people gathered around the ERT. That means the European big business. So with Lisbon, what you're doing is basically giving more of a leverage for ERT to decide whatever EU policy goes ahead, and less of a capacity to contest it on the civil society, and that's the people that will be affected by these decisions in the last case.
Right. Thanks very much for your comments.
No problem.